Hi, Tom Lynch here. Welcome to In Focus Fridays. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Andrew Hsieh from the Fred Hutch, who's going to talk to us a little bit about some of his work. Andrew just received a terrific grant from the Kleberg Foundation to support his work in bladder cancer. So Andrew, first of all, bladder cancer, we think of it as a disease that really has a lot of different presentations. Some people have isolated superficial bladder cancers. Other people have more invasive bladder cancers. What do you study about bladder cancer?
So bladder cancer absolutely is a major problem within the United States and around the world. And that's really borne out by some very significant statistics, such as 80,000 patients a year will be diagnosed with bladder cancer, in particular 2020. About 20,000 patients actually will die from advanced stage disease. It's also the most expensive cancer to monitor and treat after diagnosis. And up until recently, there have been very, very few therapeutics. Although I have to say it's been a very exciting time to be in bladder cancer research as a clinician as well, not just as a scientist, because of the advent of immune therapies, targeted therapies, as well as antibody drug conjugates. With that,
how much of bladder cancer is related to tobacco?
Great question. A lot. So one of the major causes of bladder cancer in the modern world is tobacco smoke. And it's interesting because when we think about smoking, we usually think heart disease, lung cancer. And yet with bladder cancer, it's very interesting that the risk for bladder cancer does not decrease over time once you stop smoking. So when you smoke, it actually leaves like a fingerprint for the development of bladder cancer in a group of patients. So it's a very serious connection between the two.
Yeah.
It's also very interesting in that, bladder cancer itself is a very significantly understudied and underfunded cancer compared to some of the other cancers that are being studied around in the world. So for us, we really think it presents to us not only a challenge, but a unique opportunity to make a difference in this field.
And Andrew, why do you think it's underfunded?
I think it's underfunded because there is a lack of philanthropy, in particular within this space. Although there are now programs that have been built and are growing, such as the Bladder Cancer Action Network, which has really been trying to get the word out on bladder cancer and the issues of bladder cancer surrounding patients, as well as the biology of it. But also groups like the Kleberg Foundation and this particular grant, I think, make a huge difference because it puts much needed resources into this understudied cancer. I think the other issue, too, is that the availability of models, the availabilities of tumor specimens, and the availability of scientists actually studying is very low compared to other cancers. So as a result of that, you bring those two together, it's just a smaller group. Pretty small group compared to other cancers that are being studied around our nation and the world.
Now, Andrew, in your presentation, from taking a look at it, one of the things that I found interesting is in my career, and if you look at around the Hutch, many of the people work on solid tumors, we focus so much on trying to define the mutational profile of a tumor and what the changes in the tumor DNA are that might change protein expression and have an oncogenic mutation that's driving the cancer. Tell us a little bit about how you're taking that further and actually thinking about protein translation and getting a sense of what else can be causing cancers in this setting.
Absolutely. So the central focus of my laboratory is to understand the process by which genetic information is taken, such as DNA, RNA, and turned into proteins. Now that process is called mRNA translation or protein synthesis. And that's a really important aspect of gene regulation that is not studied very much and needs to be studied differently than the way we study like DNA and RNA. Now for me, from a kind of a theoretical or philosophical standpoint, I study proteins because they're the building blocks of life. Right, so you have the genetic information in DNA, RNA, and then you have proteins, which are the things that actually make the cell, the organ, or the person or animal. So the example that I give of this, it's kind of like the difference between a cookbook and a meal that's actually made from the instructions in the cookbook. So the cookbook are the instructions, like the DNA and the RNA, and the protein is the actual meal. Now, both are very, very important, but it's the information that's needed to make the meal. It is the meal itself that you enjoy and that is nourishing to the body. So that's kind of the standpoint of biology that my lab focuses on, to really understand how that meal is made. And in understanding that, we want to know its biology. We want to know how it works. We want to know how it is deregulated or messed up in cancer, and in this case, bladder cancer. And we want to take that information and use new second generation, third generation, new drugs to actually target the process of protein synthesis for the benefit of patients. And I think as a correlate, we also want to know which patients will actually benefit from these new types of therapies that are emerging. Now, it's important to note that a lot of the work that my lab has already done and labs around the world are doing kind of point to this idea that this process of protein synthesis regulates very distinct processes of the kind of the life cycle of a cancer. So it can help the cancer grow. It can help it evade cell death signals. It can help it metastasize, which is to go from the original organ to other places in the body and cause a lot of havoc for patients. And very importantly, recent work from our lab has really shown that it's important for drug resistance. So we think that by studying this and understanding the basic biology of protein synthesis, not only will we kind of open up a new paradigm for thinking about bladder cancer itself, but also open up new avenues for therapeutics for patients.
And Andrew, what do we have here at the Hutch that enables this type of research in terms of creating an environment that you're able to do this?
So I would say at the Fred Hutch, the key word that I would say that highlights what we have here that I have found just amazing is collaboration. And that goes for the lab itself, as well as my work with other bladder cancer researchers in and around the Fred Hutch and the University of Washington. So one of the main issues in studying bladder cancer is that we really need to, at least in my mind, we need to study the type of bladder cancer that hurts patients, the type that eventually leads to the demise or death of patients. And in order to do that, we really need to get tissue samples. But that's actually very difficult to get, because after a patient dies, we usually do not have access to those tissues, those precious tissues that have actually hurt the patient. But at the University of Washington and the Fred Hutch, we've been very forward thinking about collecting these tissues. So about 5 years ago, we started what we call the Bladder Cancer, or the Bladder Cancer Focused Rapid Autopsy Program. It's one of the first programs in the nation that enables us to collect, after consent of patients, the most late-stage disease. And I'm happy to say that over these 5 years, we've collected a large cohort in this, and that's going to be one of the aspects of this grant that is going to be used to study this particular cohort, to understand how translation is misregulated in the most advanced stage disease. I say the other part of collaboration that's been huge has been the ability to develop technology in my lab. And that has been really nucleated by the fact that when I was recruited here about 6 years ago into the Division of Human Biology, they were very open, saying, Andrew, the goal for you here, I mean, you're a physician and a scientist, but we see you as a scientist really breaking the boundaries of how we study biology. And the goal here will be for you to really move in directions that you think are important for the problem of bladder cancer or prostate cancer. It's another thing that the lab and I study. And so being able to work with different labs in and around the Fred Hutch have enabled us to take risks in developing technologies. And one of the technologies we developed, which is going to be prominently used in this grant and for this proposal, is to actually study the aspects of mRNA in which the protein synthesis machinery actually binds. And in order to do that functionally, we developed this new technology called plumage, or pooled full-length UTR multiplex assay in gene expression. Very excited about this. We're actually just starting to publish this work, but we're going to actually use this new technology and harness it with the rapid autopsy program to really understand how the landing sites for the translation factories of a cell are actually messed up in cancer, and really break open a new field of biology.
And Andrew, I think your point about the importance of pathology being so critical to what we do in cancer biology, I think is incredibly critical. Whether we're talking about bladder or lung or breast or lymphoma or any other type of disease, being able to study tissue is the really heart of what we do in translational research. And I got to just congratulate you on this work. It's terrific work, and it's a great example of bringing incredible science to a very clear patient need. So congratulations on your grant. We look forward to having updates on the progress you're making, and it's really terrific to have you here at the Hutch. Thanks very much. This is Tom Lynch, and this has been In Focus Fridays. Thank you.